Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about how we can go about solving rational inequalities. So let's take a look at the first problem we're going to do, and we have the following. We'll have x over x minus 4, and this will be less than or equal to 2. Okay, so when solving rational inequalities, the first step you always want to do, okay, is move everything over to one side. So notice I have this 2 here. I want to move this over to the left. Alright, so what I'm going to have here is the following. I have x over x minus 4, and I have minus 2 now, and again less than or equal to 0. Alright. Now your next step, once you move everything over to the left side, okay, we need to simplify this down. Now in order to simplify this down, we're going to have to get a common denominator between our two terms here, right? Remember, this is going to be negative 2, but it's really over 1, right? So if you want, we can go ahead and write this over 1 so it's a little more visual here. So we'll have negative 2 over 1, right? So I can see my denominators. We have to get a common denominator. So simply, we're just going to multiply both denominators. So x minus 4 times 1, right? That's how we can get a common denominator. And we'll get the following. So x minus 4 times 1 is just going to be x minus 4, okay? And we can go ahead and put it in parentheses. Okay, so what did I multiply this by in order to get this common denominator? Well, I multiplied by 1, right? So I'm going to do 1 times x, or just x, right? Okay, what did I multiply this by in order to get my common denominator? Well, I multiplied by x minus 4. Okay, so I'm going to do negative 2 times x minus 4. So I'm going to get the following, negative 2x, okay, and then I'll get positive 8. Alright? And again, this will all be less than or equal to 0. So we're almost there, okay? Next step, you want to simplify it down, meaning you want to factor if you can. So let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit. So I have two like terms here, an x and a minus 2x, so that will just become minus x. So I have minus x plus 8 all over x minus 4, again, less than or equal to 0. Okay, again, see if you can factor the numerator and denominator. Well, my denominator is completely factored. Here, I can take out a negative 1. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to take out a negative 1, and I have the following. I have x minus 8, okay? And then I'll have x minus 4 less than or equal to 0, okay? At this point, okay, we're going to do something called a sign analysis, all right, in order to solve this. So we're going to set up our number line. So let's go ahead and do that. And this is fairly simple, okay? So we're going to take our factors and we're going to put them on the number line. We're going to do a sign analysis. So for example, you only want to use your factors here. So the ones that are including the variables. So I have x minus 8, right? Well, if I were to solve that, that's really just 8, right? So what I'm going to do is make a dash here. We'll say that this is 8, okay? And now think about the type of circle you're going to put on here. If I put an 8 in here, right, this whole thing will become 0, right? And then 0 divided by anything is going to be 0, right? Well, will that satisfy this? 0 is going to be less than or equal to 0? Yes, that will work, right? So I'm going to put a closed circle here because it tells us that yes, we can put an 8 in here and we can still satisfy this inequality. Okay? Now, for example, if this was not equal to, okay, that would not work out because think about it, if we put an 8 in, okay, we would get 0 here and we have 0 is less than 0. That is not true. So if this was the case, we would have to put an open circle, right? So again, this is going back to solving linear inequalities, closed circle and open circle. If you have a closed circle, you're right on it. Okay, open circle, you aren't on it, but you are right up against it. Okay, so let's go ahead and put what we originally had here. So again, we determine it's going to be a closed circle. Let's look at our other factor. When we solve it, we're just going to get 4 here. So I'm going to go 4, and let's determine what I'm going to put there. Is it going to be an open or closed circle? Well, if I put 4 in for x, what happens? I'll have 4 minus 4, and then I'll have division by 0. And if we have division by 0, it will be undefined. Okay, so we can't have that. It can't be undefined. So we're going to put an open circle here, right? It can't be equal to 4 because then it will be undefined. All right, so an open circle. All right, now we're just simply going to do something called a sign analysis. We're just going to test the points now. So we're going to test the regions on the number line. So for example, this is going to be one region, okay? This will be a second region, and this will be a third region, okay? So we're going to test everything to the left of 4, so you can just pick a random value here, anything that is less than 4. So pick an easy one, let's pick 0, okay? So if I plug 0 in for x here, let's see what happens with the signs, okay? If I plug a 0 in, well, this is just going to be -8, right? And then -8 times a -1 will be positive. So I'm going to put positive on the top, okay, over, if I plug a 0 in here, right, well, this will become negative, right? -4, so I'll have a negative on the bottom. A positive divided by a negative will always be negative, okay? As a result, negative, right, is always going to be less than or equal to 0. So that's true, meaning that this region checks out, okay? So this region is good, all right? Let's test the next region. So we're testing after 4 and up to 8, okay? So let's go ahead and test a random number again. Let's just pick 5, all right? That's between this region. So if I plug a 5 in, so here's what we had here. If I plug a 5, what happens with the sign? So I have 5 minus 8, which will be negative, right? And then a negative times a negative is going to be positive. So I have positive on the top. 5 minus 4, again, will be positive. Positive divided by positive is positive. So is a positive going to be less than or equal to 0? No, it's not, right? So this region is no good, right? This can't be part of it. Can't be part of our solution, right? That region is no good. And we're just going to test our last region now. So again, we can pick any number here, and we can actually pick 8, right? Because we have a closed circle. Let's just pick 9. So if I pick 9, I plug it in, well, that would become positive, right? But then I have a negative, so I'll have a negative on the top. Okay, so I have a negative on the top. And then if I plug 9 in here, I'll have a positive, right? So a negative divided by a positive is always going to be negative. So negative is less than or equal to 0. That's true, right? Negative will always be less than or equal to 0. This checks out. Okay, and from this we can get our solution. Okay, so our solution here is going to be the following. We said this region was good, so and let's do this in color here. So x has to be less than 4, right? What else? X has to be greater than or equal to 8. And this is going to be our final solution. So we just went ahead and solve this inequality. Okay? Alright, let's try another example. Okay, here's another example. Again, they want us to solve the rational inequality. So this is going to be very similar to the first example that we just did. So let's go through it. Again, the first step, as always, is to move everything over to one side. Okay, so we're going to move this 4 over, so we're going to have the following. We'll have 8, then we'll have x plus 5 minus 4 less than or equal to 0. Okay, so step 1 is done. All right, step 2, we need to get a common denominator so we can go ahead and simplify this down. Now remember, this -4 is really over 1, so if you want, we can go ahead and write this over 1 so it's a little more visual and we can see what's going on. Right. To get a common denominator, we simply multiply the denominators. So we'll have the following. X plus 5 times 1 is just x plus 5, right? Okay. Well, again, what did I multiply this by in order to get this common denominator? I multiplied by 1, right? So 1 times 8 is going to be 8. Okay. What did I multiply this denominator by in order to get this common denominator? Well, I multiplied by x plus 5. So I'm going to do -4 times x, which is -4x, and -4 times 5, right? Which is going to be -20. Okay, and this will be less than or equal to 0. So at this point, we want to go ahead and simplify this down. So look, I have my like terms here. So I have an 8 and I have a negative 20. So let's go ahead and simplify this down. So I'm going to write the negative 4x, right? And then I have an 8 and a negative 20. So this will become negative 12. Negative 12. Okay, this is all going to be over x plus 5 less than or equal to 0. Okay. Again, now that we have it simplified down, we want to go ahead and try to factor the numerator and denominator if possible. Well, my denominator is already factored, right? I can definitely factor my numerator by taking out a negative 4. So why don't we go ahead and do that? So I take out a negative 4, and I'll have x plus 3, right? And this will all be over x plus 5. This will be less than or equal to 0. Alright guys, now that we have this simplified down and we have it factored, we're going to do a sign analysis. So again, we're going to make a number line. So here's our number line. Okay, and we're just going to put our factors on this number line. So our solved factors when we solve it. So if we have x plus 3, when we solve that, that's going to be negative 3. When we solve x plus 5, that's going to be negative 5. Okay? And now we have to determine what type of point we are going to put on there. Is it going to be open or closed circle? So going to negative 3, when I plug it in here, what happens? Right? Well, this whole numerator will become 0, right? Negative 3 plus 3 is 0. 0 times anything is 0. And when I divide, right, I'll get 0 here. Well, let's see what happens. So 0 is going to be less than or equal to 0. Is that true? Yes, that works out. So we can put a closed circle here, right? Put a closed circle here. Now, if again, this was not equal to, that would not work out, right? Because 0 can't be less than 0. Okay? But in this case, we can put a closed circle. So again, just be careful with your inequality sign. Going to the next one, negative 5, when I plug that in, what happens? Well, look here. If I plug in a negative 5 here, right, this whole denominator will become 0, and I can't have division by 0. If I can't have division by 0, that means it cannot be equal to negative 5, so I'm going to make an open circle. Remember, the open circle tells us, right, that it's not on that value, but it goes right up to it. Okay? All right, now we need to test our regions. Okay, so again, this is going to be considered a region, this is considered a region, and this whole thing is considered a region. Alright, so let's test from left to right. So testing to the right, to the left of negative 5. Again, we're just doing a sign analysis here. So let's just plug in negative 6. So if I plug in a negative 6 here, what happens? Well, this becomes negative 6 plus 3, which is negative 3, right? And then negative 3 times a negative 4, well, that will be positive, right? So I'm going to positive on the top. Negative 6 plus 5 is going to be negative. So look what happens here. Positive divided by negative is always going to be negative, right? Does this satisfy the inequality? Is a negative going to be less than or equal to 0? And that's true, right? A negative will always be less than or equal to 0. So this region checks out. So that's good. Let's test in between here. So we're going to have to choose negative 4. So let's try negative 4 and plug it in. So if I plug in a negative 4 here, that will give me a negative, and then a negative times a negative is a positive. So I have positive over, and then negative 4 plus 5 is going to be positive. Positive divided by positive is positive. So is a positive going to be less than or equal to 0? Well, no, it's not, right? So this region is no good, right? It doesn't check out. Alright, let's test now to the right of negative 3. So let's just pick an easy value here. Let's go ahead and just pick 0. Right? So if we plug in 0, what happens? Well, this is just 3, and then we have a negative, so we will have a negative on the top, right? Plug in a 0, positive times a negative will always be negative. Same thing down here, plug in a 0, well, I'll have a positive. Negative divided by positive will always be negative. So is a negative going to be less than or equal to 0? And yes, that's true, right? So yes. So we have our regions, we can go ahead and write our final answer now. So using those regions that we created, we know that this is going to be true here, so we're going to write the following: x has to be less than -5, right? This region was no good, so we're not going to include it. Here was good, so we're going to write x has to be greater than or equal to, right, -3. Okay, and this is going to be our final answer. Okay, so this is how you go about solving rational inequalities.